I'm John Henry Westen. Thanks for joining me on Truth and Lies, the show where we work together to shed light on common misconceptions and come to a fuller understanding of the truth. In my work in media, I have found that it is essential to speak the truth with love. Love for all people, because we are all children of God. And with that in mind, let's have a look at this week's topic. Are we to be spiritual rather than religious? Well, let's take a moment to think about that. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree, and why? Is that perhaps your own opinion or the opinion of someone you know? Maybe you've not had a chance to think about this question before. Well, today is our chance to think about it, to learn about it, and to talk about it. Within this topic, there are many lies that seep into our culture. I'm going to show you a few of them now, which we're going to address on this program.
Do you think we need to go to Holy Mass?
I think that if someone feels that God is present in nature, then there is no reason to go to a physical church.
What do you think of Catholic priests?
I'm pretty sure that I know what I need more than any priest would know.
Don't you need religion?
You don't need religion to be a good person.
What do you think about meditation?
Meditating is just as good as going to Mass.
What do you think about the religions which exist in the world?
All religions are really the same big mess. I'm better off without any of them.
Some very difficult concepts, some questions I'm sure we've heard before, answers we have to come up with that might be very difficult for us. So to help us do that, today in studio we have with us a professor from St. Mary's College in California who has his PhD in theology from Boston College. Please help me welcome Dr. Patrick Downey. Dr. Downey, where is the history of this coming from? Where is this concept that you can be spiritual without being religious coming from?
Well, I trace it back to French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who in his social contract, he gave an account of civil religion, which he was trying to replace the various religions at the time, Protestant and Catholic, with what he called a purely secular creed that just had a few simple dogmas that they weren't even claims about the truth, they were just sentiments of sociability. So you wanted there to be an affective thing that you felt, and it made you just feel good relative to the social contract. But it was all fine except it had one negative precept, and that was there was no tolerating intolerance, which is to say it only worked if you did not tolerate anyone that claimed that their creed was true. And so it all worked if you replaced the claims about truth, that I believe this is true, with I feel a certain way for the sake of public peace.
Right.
So it's pretty much been a political program from the get-go, subordinating truth to a political need for sociability.
Okay, and at the time, what was his game? It was a political power in play that was conflicting with religion, or what was that?
It was after the religious wars, and obviously tension throughout Europe between Protestants and Catholics, but then the rise of atheism and Enlightenment secularism. So he just wanted to found a new regime, a new religion that would crowd out those people that were fighting over the claims about the truth. So he thought it would be very peaceable, but it had a latent totalitarian tinge to it because of this negative thing. You had to get rid of those religions essentially in the short term or in the long term.
Okay, and that idea you believe played out over the centuries?
I think so. When he lays out the positive dogmas of the civil religion, it's just the idea that God's a benevolent father, that he's just kind of like an old man looking out over his children, and that there's kind of heaven and hell, but that's really social punishment, that there's eyes always looking at you, so you'll behave. That's all you need from God. He's just useful. It makes a moral demand upon you. And then the sanctity of the social contract. So that's the real biggie, that you view the state itself as the source of real holiness. And so if you're sociable, and if you get along and you feel like you get along with one another, the state, that's your sacred duty.
And so how is that played out now? How do we see this attitude in today's world?
Well, the kind of the classic exemplification of that is the bumper sticker that says coexist. And you see all the religious symbols, and then the whole thing is to coexist. So how can they all coexist if you don't take any of them seriously? So then we can all get along because we don't really care about them. What we do care about is coexistence. That's the highest good. That's what we really will go to the mat on.
And that totalitarianism that you talked about way back then, is that present today as well?
Yeah, but it's soft totalitarianism. There's no violence involved, but it's kind of a psychological coercion. And it's kind of forcing you to put in the back pocket any claims to truth, make it a private concern. And if anybody says, well, no, this isn't private, this is true, and we all have to deal with the truth, that person's viewed as dangerous, and somehow for the good of everybody else, that has to be somehow downplayed, pushed out of the common, public square, or somehow eliminated. And so then one censors themselves finally, and they say, well, I may have these private thoughts, but I would never say them in public. And so everybody censors themselves if they believe those things, and then they stop believing them, and they just have sentiments.
Right. It's very funny because this is a religion without calling itself religion.
Yeah.
It's sort of there, but not there in a way. So you can be a Protestant, a Catholic, a Buddhist, a whatever you are, and still be of this new religion and just not know it.
Yeah, I mean, take that phrase you hear all the time, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Because it sounds like the emphasis is I'm spiritual, but really what makes it work is I'm not religious. So it's the I'm not religious, and that's what spirituality is, not being religious. So that because there's no content of the spirituality to speak of, except that it precludes a genuine claim that this is true, and that I'm going to live my life based on this, and that life is higher than the state in sociability. That's what has to be excluded.
So this type of religious belief, even though it's not or doesn't call itself such, is also very useful for the state, so probably promoted by the state.
Oh yeah. Promoted by the state, and it tends to be stronger on the left rather than the right, but not always. And it's just because on the left, the state takes on the role of what a strong religious state would do otherwise. You think the state's going to feed the poor, the state's going to bring about all the good things in life, and so you need kind of a sacred quality to it. So it's vaguely religious and spiritual.
Right.
Whereas on the right, you tend to think, well, those things would happen in private, so maybe that's more important. So it tends to be how high you elevate the state in your life.
Right. And where does the state see the usefulness of this? And where is it useful for everybody else? Why is it being done?
Yeah. Well, because if somebody thinks certain things are true, then they basically think something's more important than what goes on in the political sphere. Well, if you think the most important thing's going on in the political sphere, those people can't get behind you. And so it really is, it is the thing that it seems to be spiritual, but spirituality really is a backup for the state itself. So they merge and come closer together. And so if you want the state to be the major player in your life, you're going to be spiritual. As much as it seems to be a private thing you do on your own, it really is something, as Rousseau says, a sentiment of sociability. So it's a feeling internal that actually ties you into people inside your head, which means in one sense they are tied into you. So who's the master here? It's probably not you, it's probably the society that's a master over what you think is a private feeling.
Right. And I think this is pretty insidious because it gives people the feeling of religion. I think the atheist or the total non-believer, it's difficult to maintain that.
Yeah, right.
I think this is probably a lot easier to maintain.
Well, that's true, because it feels good, it feels nice. It's something anybody can do without a whole lot of effort, so you can't really fail at being spiritual. You can't ever feel like you've got to work hard at it and practice. There's no real discipline to spirituality. And so it kind of reinforces a general laziness where all the big things happen just by having certain opinions. And so people are good nowadays because they have the right opinions. They're good because they're spiritual, but nobody sees good as an accomplishment, as an aspiration, as a rare virtue. So it inculcates, in a certain sense, laziness.
And becoming a saint is the most difficult thing and the most challenging thing for any human being. Religion provides the guidebook for the journey. It provides the map. It provides the mentors, the guides, the wise people who've walked before us and help us to go on this great journey. That means we're going to get rid of all of our faults, all of our imperfections. We're going to become truly the person God created us to be. That's hard work. It's like climbing Mount Everest 3 times. This is the most difficult task for any human being. Do we think that we're going to do it without any guides or any guidebooks or any maps or any helpers or any mentors? And religion, therefore, provides just that.
How can a Christian believe this, or what does a Christian look like, or a
Yeah.
Catholic look like,
Yeah.
who accepts this philosophy, who is really of this religion, even though he might think he's
Yeah.
Catholic or Christian?
Well, just as I said, it breeds laziness. In terms of the intellectual sphere, it breeds ignorance. So you can be completely ignorant of your Catholic tradition, and this will allow you to still feel spiritual. And vice versa, because you just want to be spiritual, you won't bother learning your own tradition. And so it feeds on just the lack of catechesis in the church. People just don't learn it. They don't feel like they ought to learn it. And then leaders don't feel like they need to teach anybody anything, because this can happen without any thought whatsoever, without any education, without any training.
There are also, I guess, some figures who know and hear about Catholic teaching and call themselves Catholic, and yet at the same time are very much opposed to Catholic teaching. And they sort of seem to fit everything you're talking about with regard to spiritual but not religious.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they may not put the emphasis on the not religious, because that sounds a bit too negative, but they'll say, yeah, this is my religion and I'm proud of my religion. But what they're really saying is a cultural background. It's a cultural faith. And then, but their real thing is the spirituality, and that connects them to everybody. So it's great for a politician, because then you don't exclude any of the voters. You're always on their side, because if you actually said, I'm this faith, then I'm going to lose the votes of the people that aren't that faith. But that's not the American tradition. Is you had a real strong faith because the church was above the state, and the state was designed to protect the church from the inroads of the state. This puts it where the church is below the state, and so it tends to undermine, I think, the first freedom of our country, which is protecting the church from the state.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard politicians who are very famous in America talk even about Jesus and say, you know, I love Jesus. But then they sort of morph Jesus into this new religion.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a sociologist, Dr. Christian at Notre Dame, that has done surveys on what most people believe most of the time, especially younger folks in America. And he summarizes what he finds, and Protestants, Catholics, even Mormons, probably less so than others. They tend to be more sure of what they believe. And he calls it moral therapeutic deism. And it's moral because it's kind of the idea of what it is to be good, to be nice, essentially. It's therapeutic because it really is just therapy for one's psyche. It's kind of a drug you need because the assumption is you're kind of uneasy. So like antidepressant, or you could do this sort of thing. And then it's deism because the God you're dealing with is a God who's really far away. And even Jesus, he's not a God. He's like your therapist. And so he gives you therapy, and then there's God out there who benignly, almost senilely smiles at you. But you're not dealing with a God that has demands upon you, that expects you to repent or do anything radically new or different in your life. So just pat you on the head, basically, for what you're already doing. What's not to like?
Yeah.
Unless you want to be better.
Right. Yeah. I think this would also feed into really almost defeat the conscience. The conscience tends to trouble us when we do things that are, against the will of God and wrong. And inherently we have that in us. We know that's wrong. There's a lot of guilt that comes with that.
Right. Yeah.
This seems to work against that even.
Well, it works against just the conscience, because it really is, spirituality is the way that you can say, well, I really am a good person. And I really, I may do a few bad things, but I really am a good person. This is a whole understanding of reality that reinforces that easy delusion that we have, that we're just kind of good people no matter what we do, because we have such good intentions. Our hearts feel that we want to be good. But there's no demand to actually attend to our actions, to actually examine them honestly. It precludes the truth from top to bottom, the truth about God, the truth about reality, and even the truth about what we really are doing and thinking and intending. It lets us off the hook for truth. But that's been there from the foundations of Rousseau. Wow. He thought the truth was divisive and dangerous. Well, it is. But if you don't have the truth, you don't have what deep down everybody knows is really good in life.
How do we recognize these trends in ourselves? And once we do that, how do we come out?
Well, I think the main way you recognize this is we pay way too much attention to our feelings. Everything's a feeling, and we want to feel things. If we ever do go to church, and you don't really have to go to church, but if you do for this thing, you go there because you want to feel something. You don't really want to think about things. You don't want to get your thoughts in line with reality. You just want to feel. And anybody can do that. And so it's doctoring your feelings. And insofar as we spend a lot of time doctoring our feelings, we're very susceptible to this sort of non-creed creed. And that's just the great temptation of our world is therapy rather than faith. Because faith means it involves a creed where you're asserting things as true, and you place your confidence in this as being true. But when it comes to feelings, you don't care about the truth. You just want to use what everyone says for one's feelings. It's like a drug. And drugs are becoming more and more pervasive, not just on the fringes, but in the center of ordinary Americans. Drug-taking therapy is going on across the board.
How does a person climb out of this kind of belief structure? If they've been stuck in it by, their family brought them up this way, or they just got there.
That's hard to say, because that's a problem when you're, so to speak, that drugged up. You don't notice that you're drugged up, so it gets kind of snowballing effect.
Right.
There has to be some shock or some argument, something that gives you an appetite for the truth. That could be a disaster. That you could do something so terrible that you realize, well, I can't just feel good anymore. I've got to face what I've done. So quite often, a real crisis in one's life can shake you out of it. Or there's classic experiments you can do, like Plato has Gyges' ring. You think you're just kind of a good person, put on a ring that makes you invisible, like Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power, and ask yourself, okay, would you do exactly the same thing you're doing with this ring on where you're invisible as you do when people can see you? If you find that you imagine all sorts of different things you might want to do if people didn't see you, maybe you're not so good. Maybe there's something about you that you shouldn't be patting yourself on the back so readily. Maybe you got a deep down problem because you're only good when you're kind of lying to others and lying to yourself. But are you truly that good? And if you want the truth, that would mean you want real goodness. That would mean you'd have to be good without kind of lying to yourself. But if you need to lie to yourself to feel good, that's a problem. But it's a problem that's very dangerous because you may not notice or feel it's a problem because it kind of feels good. If you go for quality, you're mounting up. And the nature of quality doesn't die when you die.
There's no hating from Christians to homosexual persons, but there is wanting to tell them, hey, that behavior is harming you. It's harming you physically.
Freedom is freedom from other people or society or whatever, but freedom for the truth is like the good life. You're going for what's good and what's true. You know what you're up to.
Jesus is God. Jesus is Lord. Jesus has the victory.
We all have a call to greatness, a desire for it. We want to do something good.
Now is your time. You could change the world, and the world needs changing, so get busy.
Shalom World, God's own channel.
You think the state's going to feed the poor, the state's going to bring about all the good things in life, and so you need kind of a sacred quality to it, so it's vaguely religious and spiritual.
The conscience tends to trouble us when we do things that are, against the will of God.
The church was above the state, and the state was designed to protect the church from the inroads of the state.
So if someone says to you, for instance, someone doesn't need religion to be a good person, very common argument in this sphere, how do you answer them?
Well, to answer brutally, I'd say they're lying. But that's what's scary about lying. We can lie so thoroughly that we don't pay attention to our own lies.
Right.
And I think it's pretty much a lie that we are good people. But it's such a deep lie that if you go to the biblical tradition, half of what's going on in the Old Testament is to get people to realize that they aren't good people. I mean, you go to the last commandment, the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. Oh, sure, I can obey that one. Well, everybody violates that because it just means that you want your neighbor's wife, you want your neighbor's car, you want your neighbor's whatever, and then you pay attention to that. Well, this is what you're doing all the time. You're always wanting other people's stuff. You don't do anything about it. You don't steal, but you're intending that. And so when you pay attention to that, that's why you're You're fundamentally unhappy because you want things that aren't yours, and you don't really want who you are or what you have. And so there's this fundamental way we're not good because we're not really content with ourselves. We're at war with ourselves, which means we're at war with one another, but we hide it. And so we don't even notice this. And you can't arrest people for being covetous. So it's not something you deal with externally, but internally, it's the worm gnawing at us. And we need to pay attention to that, and that's what you need to be saved from. But first you got to see that there's something really wrong. And this is just like a drug, like aspirin, that masks the headache that we all suffer from. Whereas Christian faith that claims things are true is because this is true because we have to see that we need to repent and see why we need this, and then this is good news for us. But for it to be good news, we have to uncover the fact that something's not right. And this just masks the symptoms. But the disease remains.
Absolutely. I think I knew a person once who was actually seemed like a very good person and had that very same attitude. And it was funny what brought her out into faith was actually seeing real evil and realizing, there must be some kind of spiritual evil here because this is like way, way beyond. And it was then that made her think, well, then there must really be a God as well. And so that kind of shock realization, as you were talking about earlier, or hitting rock bottom, are definitely motivating factors.
And that can, as bad as it is, it can be good for us. It's like we were swathed in cotton in our modern world, and spirituality is another layer of cotton, so we can just never feel reality bump into us, internal reality or external reality.
The attitude that's also common today that you hear around this thing is, well, I know what I need more than any priest could. What do you say to that?
Well, what does that mean? What do we need? I need to kind of go to sleep. I need to stop thinking about, stop worrying. So there's all of these sorts of things. Our needs are so low because it really is, I need to not pay attention. I need to sleepwalk longer. But to really know what you need, it means you've got to want more. You've got to want a lot more. And that's what the faith tradition is. It gives you this high calling as to what the truth is, but it also, for you to respond to that, you've got to gain an appetite for it. You've got to want more from life. Where spirituality seems to give people what they want, and they know what they want because they want so little. They actually want to not pay attention, because if they wanted more, they imagine that being painful. But people should want more, because guaranteed you won't get happiness if you're content with just avoiding pain. It's like avoiding death won't give you life. You've got to seek life, but to get life, you've got to be willing to die for certain things. Because if you have no reason to die, you have no reason to live.
And when you say want more, I mean, maybe some people are thinking, well, I want lots. I want a car, I want a house, I want two jacuzzis or whatever.
And seek your dream, follow your dream.
What do you mean by want more?
You got to want something that is qualitatively good, and you know why it's good, rather than just quantity. Because quantity, if you want quantity, it's like $1. I want $1, I want another $1, you just add it up. But then you add it up, and then finally you die, you lose it all. But if you go for quality, you're mounting up. And the nature of quality doesn't die when you die. So there's a way, if you really are attending the fact that you are mortal, that you are going to die, getting another car is just madness. And that's why we go after that, because we don't think we're going to die in our culture. But if you know you're going to die, then you've got to get an appetite for things that don't die, that are eternal. And that's what it is to want more, is to want more, not quantitatively, but qualitatively, because that's, you want eternity. As even the Greek philosophers knew, what do humans want? They want immortality. That's what you want, and that's quality. But we don't even want that anymore. We're happy, I just want to stay alive. The joke is you can't do that.
And the only route to that is the route to real truth. The route through Christ.
People that say they don't need religion to be a good person don't understand what the word religion means. The word religion is a Latin word, religio or religare, which means to bind something to someone else. So true religion binds us to God. And that's exactly the meaning and purpose of life. People that are involved in voodoo, they're spiritual. People that are involved in macumba, they're spiritual. People that are involved in Scientology, they're spiritual. People that are involved in Santeria, they're spiritual. People that are involved in all these cults, Satanism, they're spiritual. But the fact is, True spirituality should lead you to true religion, which is a relationship with God through His Son Jesus Christ and all the precepts that the church gives us, not to make our life frustrating, but to give us insight for proper living.
What are the sort of the main beliefs that people need to, or is there? I mean, can you name some key things that people can latch on to come out of this way of thinking?
Well, I mean, one, for say you're a Catholic and you're just kind of, I'm Catholic and spiritual, but I'm not that religious. Well, you should pay attention to your religion, learn it, see why it says something. Open the Catechism of the Catholic Church and kind of learn the Catechism rather than what you may have had when you're in high school in your classes where they just talked about your feelings and what you feel about the stuff. You have a tradition that's all about the truth, that has reasons for these things that go way back. See what that is. And you may find yourself, wow, this is actually more exciting and more fulfilling than just this feeling. But I didn't expose myself to it, so I had no idea. Right. And whoever was teaching your catechism didn't expose you to it. If you go for it yourself, you may find that it's much more satisfying.
I think there's often, particularly today and maybe particularly in the last 50 years, I think a lot of Catholics, a lot of Christians could have been told, well, this is the Catholic faith, and fed exactly that Rousseau type of religion.
Yeah. I mean, actually what Rousseau said 100 years later, this guy Harnack, he gave an argument, what is the essence of Christianity? What's the real nut out in the middle of the shell? Turns out to be exactly what Rousseau said. So plenty of Catholics, so what is it to be a Catholic? They'll trot it out, and it's the sentiment of sociability. But they think it's the Catholic faith.
Wow.
That's just a level of ignorance that is very pervasive. And a lot of people that should be making sure that doesn't happen are dropping the ball. They're not doing it. It's a real shame.
So you say that the Catechism is a clear. It's not all that concise, but I mean it's.
Well, there's concise forms. Even that little thing for kids, the kids' catechism. There's a more concise form.
Oh yeah.
If youth were reading that, rather than what they tend to get, all this touchy-feely stuff in their classes where you feel with one another, they should get together and think and read, because that's just good training. When you're young, you actually want to think. In spite of what people say, you don't. That's when you, right at that moment in life, you really want to think about things. There's a lot's going inside, outside. You want to learn stuff. They should teach this when people are most able to learn it.
Yeah. One of the other sentiments that's often expressed around this, and it's a very common statement, you know, I feel God much more in nature than I do in church. What do we need church for?
Yeah. Again, I think that goes back to Rousseau too. But that's the feeling of the sublime, as though you go out to Yosemite and this big towering granite mountain. It checks you, but then the thing inside of me is even as good as that. And so that's the source of the spirit. What you see outside is really the inside thing. And he's made a whole industry of that. Again, though, what does that really mean? As much as you're out in nature, you really, really have society inside of you. You haven't left society, so you really aren't dealing with nature. And for one, you're not really knowing things. You're not a scientist in nature. You're not coming to know anything. You're just feeling. But when do you really gain access to nature? When you understand it. But to understand nature, the more you cognitively come to know what things are out there, what's going on, then you got to go, what's the source of my knowledge? So you transcend, and then you're dealing with the classical notion of God, even prior to the revelation. The philosophers knew to understand nature is to understand the source of nature, and that's God. That the God of the philosophers, but he's also the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
What do you respond to people when they say, as often they do, that institutional religion causes corruption?
Institutional things always tend to get corrupted, you know, so try to avoid it. You know, so you can't avoid an institution, but the church is the church that is there because it's dealing with that fact of corruption. It flows from its Lord who suffered that corruption more than anybody else. That's, in one sense, it's all about corruption and how to deal with it. But the corruption's not out there in other people. The corruption's inside your heart. So if you're trying to tend to that, you're not busy looking for it out there. You're realizing, what am I going to do about it? This is that institution that is dealing with corruption more than any other institution, because it's all about how we can no longer be corrupt and how we need each other to get to that point. And above all, we need God himself. That's how big a miracle it'll take for us no longer be corrupt. So it's not a problem out there, it's a problem we have within us. But you can't paper that over, you can't get rid of the symptoms, you gotta look at that corruption. And if you think it's out there, you'll never look at it inside. But if you look at it inside, then you realize what's gonna deal with that. That's the thing that gives me my best hope that I can get rid of the corruption inside of me, is the church.
A lot of people talk too about meditation. You know, meditation is, the Buddhists have it, the Hindus have it, in all these religions you see meditation. So it's really all the same anyway. And I meditate, and that's really good. And
yeah.
How do you respond to that? What do you make of that?
Well, you know, the difference is, say, a Californian meditating versus a Zen monk that's been out in the Chinese monastery for the last 30 years. They know what they're doing. We're amateurs that are just applying a technique. So we should, in one sense, be a bit embarrassed when we call it meditation. For them, it's a discipline. For us, it's not a discipline. It's just a little trick we do. It's just, you know, maybe this will work. If this doesn't work, I'll take Valium. You know, it's just it's a drug. It's just whether it works. And so in one sense, we just should laugh at ourselves when we call it meditation or Eastern. It's just a way of kind of like Halloween, we're playing dress up. So I think we just shouldn't be so impressed when we meditate, because it's pretty half-assed compared to what's going on over there.
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting concepts of this is, you mentioned earlier that the real God is the state. However, I think there's a real illusion in the practice, because it seems like from the insider, from the individual's perspective, almost their God, or inside them is God.
Yeah. But that's one of the scary things, is how the outside social world is what tends to fill your inside, because you bring that world inside. Think of the teenager, you know, the society around him in high school. That's really what's inside the kid's head, and he wants to get it out. It drives him crazy. Well, spirituality is just this, where it happens in a big way, and it's so done so thoroughly that you don't notice anymore. You just think it's a private spiritual world, but it's just that you brought the outside world inside, and that's really what's calling the shots. It's a scary sort of thing, because it is so political, and yet it's designed not to be noticed. It's designed to be your own most authentic self.
And the lack of freedom. It's funny, because all these concepts are so reversed. You'd think in that state you have this absolute freedom. You can almost do absolutely anything. And yet, it's not really true, is it?
No. Yeah, it's kind of freedom from anybody telling you what to do. Above all, religion saying things are true. But if it's freedom from, it has no content. It's a zero content. It's just that you get along and hold hands like a giant zero. But the real freedom that sets you free is freedom for what's good. It's freedom for what's true. So if you have freedom divorced from the truth, that freedom is vacuous, has no content. It's like life, which is really fear of death. Freedom is freedom from other people or society or whatever, but freedom for the truth is like the good life. You're going for what's good and what's true. You know what you're up to, and your mind's fully engaged, and so it has content. You know what you're doing, and you know that you're aiming for real human happiness. You can't aim for anything when you want freedom. You're just avoiding stuff.
Why is it that the people of faith, people of religion, if you will, can't just allow these folks to be, can't just be peaceable, have to be intolerant? Because it seems that there is a real call not to be tolerant of error and sin. Why is that?
Well, I mean, it's not the issue of being intolerant. It's just that the truth has a claim on you. Okay, but if you're seeking the truth, it's not like you can force somebody to follow the truth. So there's no hostility towards people who aren't following the truth. It's just that when you're following the truth, it seems very definite. And you could say, as a kid, your parents are intolerant because they really want good things for you. I wish my parents would not want anything good for me, because they seem to not tolerate what I want to do. Well, it's because they really want good things for you. It's a sign of love and care. And it can seem like pressure upon you. But that's just that's because the truth does have a claim. So in one sense, spirituality is just to avoid that pressure of putting any claim upon you. And reality putting any claim upon you. But that claim can seem like an assault. But health can seem like an assault when you want to be sick.
Yeah.
The claim, well, maybe I shouldn't do this because it'll make me sick. You know, well, that's like oppression to you when you're deluded.
Yeah.
But it really is actually life that's calling you, the good life that's calling you if you look at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you really hit upon it there when you talked about the love. That love compels us, like it compels a parent to want good for the child, to at least inform our brothers and sisters of the truth.
Yeah.
And when those truths sort of come into conflict with the state's new dogmas of, you know, like the example of same-sex marriage, there's no hating from Christians to homosexual persons, but there is wanting to tell them, hey, that behavior is harming you. It's harming you physically, but nobody believes that anymore. But at least we know it's harming you spiritually.
Oh, exactly, right, yeah.
So we're saying this not out of any kind of animus, hatred, bigotry, or anything, actually out of love.
Exactly, yeah.
And actually out of a wanting eternal life for them.
Exactly, right, yeah.
So we can't actually just not do that.
Yeah, right. It'd be cruel.
That's right.
Just to not say what's true.
And even if that would lead us to be persecuted, we'd persist nonetheless.
Yeah, and it may come more and more to that. But, you know, the church has famously been persecuted because its love of people that aren't Christians at all. It loved the Romans, it loves all sorts of people, but that love causes no end of trouble for the church. But that's the trouble the church knows it's going to take upon itself, because look what happened to its master. He loved the world and he paid a big price for it. We know love will demand a price from us, but it's worth it, because once you've tasted love, nothing else will satisfy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you want to give it towards others, and you may suffer, but you wouldn't cause anyone else to suffer. The church is founded upon someone who is victimized by people. There's nothing at all that victimizes in the church. It has no desire to cause harm to anybody, because it's based upon love. And the truth is a source of goodness. That's the problem, is we don't think truth and goodness goes together. The church firmly believes that truth and goodness go together.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us, Brian.
It was my pleasure.
It's great.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, if people want to know more about your work, about this philosophy, where can they find out?
Well, I've got a book that touches on some of these themes. It's called Desperately Wicked, Philosophy, Christianity, and the Human Heart. And so it deals with Rousseau and Nietzsche and Plato and the Bible, and it deals with the human heart, the gap between our inner self and our outer self, the thing that I mentioned with that ring. So that'd be a book to kind of see how this plays out philosophically.
Great. Where can they get that book?
InterVarsity Press.
Right. The name of it one more time.
Desperately Wicked.
Okay.
Yeah. From Jeremiah, it's not my turn. The heart is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. Who can know it?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And for some other resources, there are, of course, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, as Dr. Downey mentioned previously. And there are some great spiritual works of true spirituality that bring us to faith the right way. I would recommend to you Introduction to Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales, my own personal favorite, St. Louis de Montfort's True Devotion to Mary, and Imitation of Christ by St. Thomas à Kempis. My friends, we have once again been given a wealth of information, facts that prove the truth that comes from God and is taught by His Church. Have your opinions shifted during the course of our discussion? My hope is that you are more ready now to answer those tough questions that people have. Remember that in the Scriptures we learn that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by Him. We want to hear from you here at Truth and Lies. Let us know what other topics you'd like us to cover. You can do that at #TruthAndLies and visit us online at shalomworld.org/truthandlies. Until next time, my friends, go forth and spread the truth with love. God bless you.